A big reason we study geometry is so that we can learn a common language for describing the shapes and figures that we see in our world. And now that we've introduced angles, we can add to our common language and look at the ways that we can describe angles, specifically in the way that they're related to each other.
All right, so we're talking about angle pairs and the different relationships that two angles can have with each other. So we've got some new terms in here, maybe some terms that you've heard before, and we want to really make sure that we understand visually what we're talking about with these terms, because they also help us understand angle measurement as we understand the term. So let's talk about this first one. Complementary angles are two positive angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. So each angle is the complement of the complement of the other. So complementary angles are two positive angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. So visually, if we look at that, we see here, so the angles can be joined, or what we'd say are adjacent, and we'll talk about that later. They can be adjacent to each other, so these two angles, 1 and 2, their measures add up to 90 degrees. And we can see that because of this little box right here, right? If you see that box in the corner of an angle, either that being one angle or two angles, that's telling you that's 90 degrees. Okay? But two angles can also be separate or non-adjacent, and they can also be complementary. So we see this angle A is 20 degrees, this angle B is 70 degrees, add that together, that's 90. And so those would be complementary angles. The next kind are supplementary. Supplementary angles are two positive angles whose measures have a sum of 180 degrees. And each angle is the supplement of the other. So supplementary angles are two positive angles whose measures have a sum of 180 degrees. Okay, so let's look at a couple visuals for that. So again, here we have adjacent angles 3 and 4. These two angles, 3 and 4, their measurements would add up to 180, which is a straight line. Okay? Remember, a straight line forms 180 degrees. But they can also be separate angles. So like this angle C is 115, this angle D is 65, that's 180. And so we would say that those two angles are supplementary to each other. And lastly, here we have adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are two angles that share a common vertex and side, but have no common interior points. Okay? So adjacent angles are two angles that share a common vertex and side, but have no common interior points. So if we look here in these figures, 5 and 6 are adjacent because they share that common vertex right there on that line, and they share this common side, this ray right here. But 7 and 8 would be non-adjacent because they have two different vertices, and they don't share any common sides. And they don't have a common side, and they have no common interior points. Okay? And so these would definitely not be adjacent. And then the part about having interior points for 5 and 6, we would see that they have this side in common, but none of these points are the same as these points over here. And so they have no common interior points for those angles. Okay? So we'd say these are adjacent, and these are non-adjacent. Okay? So learning these words is helpful as we start talking about angles a lot more. It's just good to have the right vocabulary. And then once we start determining angle measurements, we can use the fact that two angles are complementary or supplementary to help us understand something about their measurement. So let's look at just a few examples So number 1 says use the figure to the right to name a pair of complementary angles. All right, I might have to zoom out a little bit. Okay? So using this figure over here, we're going to find a pair of complementary angles. So we've got this angle here at FGK, and this angle here at HGK, and this angle here at GKL that we know their measurements of. And so two complementary angles would be angles whose measurements add up to 90 degrees. And we can see here that angle FGK and GKL are 41 and 49, and if we add those together, those would be 90 degrees. And so these two angles, okay, their measurements add up to 90 degrees, and so we would say they're complementary to each other. So we have angle FGK and angle GKL. Those are two complementary angles right here and right here. Notice that I'm using all three letters to name my angles, because if I just called this angle G, well, that could be this angle or this angle, right? And so if an angle could be easily mistaken with another angle, you want to make sure you're using all 3 points on that angle to easily identify which angle you're currently talking about. All right, number 2, we have a pair of supplementary angles. We want to identify a pair of supplementary angles. If you notice, you got to be real careful. This looks like it almost could be a straight line, but not completely. And so sometimes that's an easy way to tell supplementary, but not in this case. So these two angles right here are not forming supplementary angles, but these two angles right here, if we look at their measurements, 131 plus 49 is equal to 180. And so these two angles here and here are supplementary to each other. And so that would be angle HGK and angle GKL. Those are supplementary angles. Last one says name a pair of adjacent angles. Okay. So remember, adjacent means they'd have a common vertex and a common side, but no common interior points. So we can see that, we can already tell that, these two angles right here don't have a common vertex, so it's definitely not going to be this angle or this angle. But these two angles here, they share the common vertex at G and a common side at GK. Okay. So these two angles here would be adjacent to each other. So that's angle FGK and angle HGK. So this angle here and this angle here. Again, complementary, they add up to 90 degrees. Supplementary, they add up to 180 degrees. And adjacent, they share a common vertex and a common side. Now let's do one last example before we go to the next set of vocab that we need to know. Number 4, it's on the next page. So number 4 says, when viewed from the side, the frame of a ball return net that might be used by soccer players in practice forms a pair of supplementary angles with the ground. And we want to find the measurements of angle BCE and measurements of angle ECD that we see in the figure. And so this is where we're using our knowledge of what supplementary angles are in order to determine measurement. Okay? So if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see the picture a little bit better. So we've got this angle here, BCE, and this angle here, ECD. And we're told their measurements as expressions, and we want to use the fact that they're supplementary angles in order to figure out what is the actual measurement of each of these angles. So we know they're supplementary, so we know that the measurement of angle BCE plus the measurement of angle ECD should be equal to 180 degrees. Okay? I don't really need the degrees there since we're talking about their measurements. So because the two angles are supplementary to each other, their measurements should add up to 180. And so because I know that, I can then plug in their expressions. So BCE is 4x plus 8. ECD is x plus 2 equal to 180. And then I'm going to simplify and solve for x. So 4x plus x is 5x, 8 plus 2 is 10. Subtract 10 from both sides. Get 5x equal to, let me write it somewhere else so we have a little bit more room. 5x equal to 170. Divide by 5. X is equal to 34. So I found x to be 34 based on the fact that my angles are supplementary. And then I'm going to use x in order to actually determine the measurements of the angles. I might have to be a little creative with space here. So let me come over here. I'll use a different color as well. So let's first find the measurement of angle BCE. We know the measurement of angle BCE is 4x plus 8. And if we know that x is equal to 34, that's 4 times 34 plus 8. I would just do 4 times 34 and then add 8 to it, and I would get 144. So the measurement of angle BCE is equal to 144 degrees. That's one part of my answer. And then I also need to find the measurement of angle ECD. That's equal to x plus 2. I know x2 is 34, so 34 plus 2 is equal to 36. And that's the measurement of angle ECD. Oops, let me kind of do that again. So I have the measurement of BCE is 144 and the measurement of ECD is 36. A quick, easy way to make sure to check you did that right is to add these together. What's 144 plus 36? That's 180. If it came out to something else other than 180, then something probably went wrong.